hello, everybody that's here for now. We will wait just a few minutes and let everyone pop on. We are going to deep dive into some relationships today, and I've got a few people have written me some questions, so I will work with those. But if any of you want to come on and ask your questions, then you can use the raise your hand feature down at the bottom of the call. So maybe we'll wait one more minute, but for those of you that are for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Wholeness Network, we are a library. We are an online platform where we host a library of wonderful, amazing videos. If you think Netflix for wellness is what we kind of say. And our idea is to pull up one of our amazing videos, one of hundreds of videos, and start off your day in a good way. And they are designed to pull you into wholeness, or let's say you're having a rough day, pull up a video, bring yourself back. That's the idea for the Wholeness Network. And I am the founding executive of the Wholeness Network, and that has been our goal from the beginning. We can summarize it into a couple of words called, we want people to feel better. We want people to have access to ways to feel better. It's kind of a easy, simple thing, but that's what we're doing. And we have a podcast, and we have this Wholeness Network show that we are putting on a couple times a month, where we bring on our experts. And we really want the show to be very interactive with people. And that's our hope, our goal. We're just beginning. So hopefully we grow and grow and grow, but that's where we're at. And so if you want to make sure that you are invited to each of the shows, then make sure you are subscribed to the Wholeness Network. You can go to thewholenessnetwork.com. There's a Join Now tab at the top, and there's you'll get access to these for now, at least for these shows. They like for any of them, for even if it's the free plan, you will be invited to be part of the show. And so we invite you to do that. And I also host a podcast, so I will probably reference some of those episodes in today. And we are supposed to have today we were going to be joined from our lovely friend Angelina in London, and things just kind of got a little tricky this morning or this evening for them. So for her, so I'm just here by myself. So forgive me if I running around pushing, clicking buttons and reading a little bit. So but I'm grateful to have you here. And we're going to start with the idea of relationships, because relationships are where we experience all the greatest moments of our lives and the trickiest moments. They are just a little bit of both. And so we just kind of want to acknowledge that and the other thing is relationships. When we think about relationships, it's about relating to one another. I remember I had a client, and she was single, and she wanted to be in a relationship. And she would meet with this person, and I'd say, well, you are in a relationship. What are the parameters of that relationship? Because we are in a relationship with the person that we buy our groceries from. We're in the relationship with the person that we're driving down the street next to. We are in relationship to people. We are relating in some way. And so it's important to kind of differentiate the idea of romance and relationship. There's just different parameters, and that's a good part, and that's also the hard part, because there are no hard fast rules as far as being in relationship for someone. And relationships, especially those intimate relationships, let's say our kids, our spouse, our good friends, those our family, those that are important to us, like that's tender. It's a tender place to be. And sometimes they can be difficult. Sometimes they can be hard. And just, so I mean, if my kids, I've got 4 kids. My youngest will become an adult this week. So I will be full of a family of adults. But all of them would be like, they would be here and they wouldn't say, oh yeah, my mom's got all relationships all figured out, right? They're not gonna say that. But what am I thinking if they said that? I'm thinking, you don't know how good you have it, right? And isn't that how it is? Because I am showing up in my relationships almost in reflection of where I have had my relationship struggles. So I'm going to show up in this way and do things differently, in my opinion, because of what has happened to me. And they haven't had that happen to them, so they don't pick up on that as being special or great or significant. They are going to get their triggers pushed by other things that I run into with them. So, that's just to say relationships are hard. And the first thing I want to I think it's really important to stop and talk about is when we are in relationships, we when we're in conversation in these relationships or conflict or anything like that, there are 2 places that we usually go, and they are hypoarousal and hyperarousal. So one is we get lifted up, puffed up, maybe get angry, get frustrated. We start to, it's more of an overt reaction. And then at the other end, we get hypo, which is very shut down, very frozen, very maybe invert, right? Or insecure kind of a thing. And both of those things stem from the same background. It just depends on which way we're going to show up in a relationship. And so it's important to recognize that, because sometimes we don't think about that and we are unaware of where we are, whether we're in hypo or hyper. And then we also, take what the other person, if they're in hyper or hypo, as, frustrating, when it's just a natural thing that we all do. We all show up in hyper and hypo when we are in conflict, usually. And, there's another thing about relationships. So I want to tell a little story. The other day, I was riding a bike. Me and my husband have been loving going on these bike rides. I have an awesome e-bike and I love it. And the other day, well, it's been a couple of weeks now, I was riding around a corner kind of unusually fast, and I hit some gravel and my bike slipped out from underneath me. And I still have bruises that went through every color of the rainbow, right? I still have some bruises from that. And if I look at my leg and I see the bruise, it doesn't hurt to see that bruise. But when I push on it, I can feel it. It hurts. Now I'm pushing on that bruise and that's painful, but it's not my pushing on the bruise that is the injury. The injury happened several weeks ago in a really embarrassing moment of my life, right? And so if we think about it that way, that a lot of times these things that are coming up for us are like our person that we're in relationship with pushing on one of our bruises, and it hurts. It's not that it does not hurt, and it's not that it doesn't affect us in the present moment, but to understand that some of these things were created in wounds that happened long ago. And sometimes those wounds are calling out for us to have some support. And I will just put a caveat. There are a few exceptions to this, because there are relationships where the dynamics are such that there is damage happening in the present moment, for sure, 100%. And I'm sure we will get into these dynamics. There's a lot of this dynamic kind of happening where we've got, usually, like I mentioned before, usually you've got a very hyper aroused person matching up with a very hypo aroused person, somebody that is, more quiet, more understated. And then you're trying to have a conversation with somebody that's very hyper aroused. That's going to cause some conflict in the present time. And that's very common. So as we begin, anybody that wants to raise their hand, you're welcome to come on with me. And I am willing and able to support you and work with you in your individual needs and issues. In the meanwhile, I do have a few people that called in with or let me know they had some questions. So I can go ahead and start with those, but you're welcome to raise your hand at any time, and we'll put you in the queue and you can be up next. But one of the first questions I got was, my spouse and I don't have much in common. I think most of our values align, but as far as extracurriculars, we don't. He likes outdoors, hiking, sports. I like artsy things, movies, and indoor activities. I have tried to go to a few games, etc., to try and branch out, but I haven't had any movement on the other side. I am totally okay doing those things alone or with friends, but it doesn't bring us closer together. So as a couple, it was okay when we were busier with the little kids, but as they grow, she's starting to see some disparity in their relationship. And can you just identify that? It just feels like I kind of understand how that goes when we have different likes and dislikes from a partner. And some of the things I would ask this person, I would want to know a few things. Number one, I think what gets in the way the first is we begin to assume a lot about our partners, like they won't want to come, they don't like this, or or if they're not as excited about something, that automatically means they don't like it. We're reading messages more than we're getting curious about it. And the best thing that I have come to learn through my training and through real life experience is to ask questions. And in this case, let's maybe, what happens is let's not ask the question when we're in a hyper or hypo-aroused state. Let's wait until, whatever happens in the drama, and then maybe circle back. And that's given a good word to say, hey, can we circle back to the other night, when we were at that art festival, I was telling myself a story. That's another golden thing. I'm telling myself a story. I was telling myself a story that you hated it. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you were feeling, or what was really going on? And here's the thing. We're going to get probably at least two, I can think of two different results from that conversation. We're going to get, yeah, I hated it. It's not my thing. And you know what? That's going to happen. That is going to feel like a little hurt. That's going to feel like a pain. That's going to feel like an insult. And what we do is, if we can stay centered in our body, we can say, that hurt. That was difficult. Oh, I don't like that. Most of the time what we do is we go, will you, or something like that. We get, that tinge of pain brings in quickly a protector that helps, it feels like it's protecting us, but sometimes it's causing some difficulty. So if we can stay really grounded in our body and do it in a time when we feel good, and ask some questions about what that was like. So if they say, I don't like that, recognize our feeling about it and say, oh, I really wish they did, and I'd like that. But that's not the same thing as them telling me I'm a difficult person, or I'm dumb or ridiculous or whatever. But that's kind of how we'll start to tell that story, if we don't stop and just say, oh, that hurt, and I didn't like that. The other possibility, and probably even more likely, is the answer will be, I was just really tired. I just was thinking about the project I have at work, and I have all this stuff going. And in those moments, it's, getting curious. Those are the big payoffs for getting curious, because most of the time, the people that we are close to and in a relationship with really do have stuff going on in their lives, and they really care about us. And so they're not just plotting our demise or the things that they don't like about it, although sometimes it feels that way, right? So then we get into a conversation, right? That we get into a conversation. And I want to invite everybody, for those that didn't sign up through the website, make sure if you'll go to the Wholeness Network, and you can either pick join now, which is a tab at the top, or scroll to the bottom and there's even like, well, you can just subscribe. And if I can get your email, I will send you this packet I've created. It's called Safe Communication. It's a relationship script. And it is like a lifesaver when you can learn the techniques about how to have safe conversations, how to present yourself in a safe conversation. It is like just mind blowing. And really quick, I printed out some papers so I didn't have to deal with sharing my screen and back and forth. But really quick, I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of happens. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. I hope that my camera switches this backwards, or it's not backwards, but this is what's known as the drama triangle. And I don't know if you've heard it before, but a lot of times when you learn about it, you'll say, this is really a lot of the dynamic of how we are in relationships. We will show up in one of three ways. And I'll give you a scenario. So let's say I come to my spouse and I'm going to say, you just never let me blah, 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 or I just always feel like you blah, 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 or I hate it when you blah, blah, blah. We've created ourselves as a victim to something. And once we step into the triangle, whether we step here, here, or here, we are now in the triangle. And what we do is we kind of automatically force the other person to become one of these two things. So if I come in as the victim, then the persecutor is going to come in and say, "Will you?" And they're going to beat you down. They're going to beat you down, or they're going to if we're lucky, which is still not healthy behavior, but we become the rescuer. We want them to become the rescue. That's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that they come in and they take away our pain. But if you move into the drama triangle, you are also inviting each of you're going to have the persecutor now in that dynamic, because we've got to make someone be the problem. Well, usually that's how these two fix this gets fixed, right? We make someone be the problem, or we come in as the persecutor and we'd be like, if you don't do this, I'm gonna da, 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 and we become the persecutor. And we could either create a victim, of somebody, or we want them, we say, now you've got to rescue. Like, this is the person and they want you to fix this person's problem. Or we come in as this rescuer where before there's even a problem, we're rescuing. And what's interesting is it's really subtle sometimes. It's really subtle. So if the best way to describe it is with our kids, right? Because our kids will do this all the time. They'll come in and they'll say a scenario like, I'm so-and-so took my toy without asking, right? This is a little to kids version, but they took them away without asking. So they are presenting themselves as a victim. Somebody took something from them and they're asking mom or dad. So mom and dad says to the sibling, hey, you've taken that. So they've created the sibling to be the persecutor, and then the parent has been the rescuer. So this dynamic is so common. And so, and in fact, we laugh because like most romantic comedies follow this drama triangle. Sometimes, in fact, they call this the project, like this is the villain, this is the hero, and this is like the damsel in distress. That's very common. So the trick to get out of the drama triangle, the quick fix, if you're in the drama triangle, is to take responsibility. And so once you're in the drama triangle, this is how we can get out. I can see that I can see how I am this, or there is some truth in about what you're saying. So once you're in the drama triangle, then this is how we get out. We take some kind of responsibility and it just shifts the momentum. Then to not get in the drama triangle, we want to switch it around and become, so I sorry if this is backwards, but this is called, we want to progress focused, versus when we're in the drama triangle, we are survival mode. We're in survival mode. So we begin to focus on the problem, not the person. And the coach listens, supports, assists, and trusts that the other person can make a decision for themselves. Trusts, asking questions, the challenger is a question, well, hey, how does that make you feel? Or what was that like? We begin to get curious. And then because we have those, instead of a victim, we become a creator in our lives, and we start to see the possibilities, and we have the big S self empowered. We're empowered. It just feels so much more empowering to be in this creative triangle than in the victim triangle. If this is something you're interested in, reach out to me and I can get you a copy of this idea. So also, I'm going to move on to another question unless anybody else has any wants to raise their hand. I'm happy to support you. Let's see, where is another question? Here we go. So here's one. My husband and I have been together for 17 years and the passion has faded. I'm feeling stuck in a routine and the spark seems to be dwindling. How can we reignite the passion and keep the relationship vibrant and fulfilling over the long term? Am I just being overly dramatic? So an interesting thing is the last line to me is very interesting line. Am I just being over dramatic? So we live in a very binary world. Things are either good or bad. And once we choose into a very binary world, then we begin to have things like, am I the bad guy or are they the bad guy? Am I the problem or are they the problem? And most of the time, number one, it's not a problem. It's just a situation. Most of the time it is just a conglomerate of all that we've been through and all that we've experienced in our lives, and good or bad gets really kind of difficult to say or to label, right? So that's the number one thing, is just to kind of recognize, if we can start to open up the ideas of possibilities. Maybe I have moments of drama. That's probably true. Am I overly dramatic? Probably not. But does this mean something to me? I mean, what I gather from that is that this is very important to her, and she wants to take some responsibility. She's willing to take responsibility, but to her, it's probably pretty clear that this is not okay. Now, the truth is we don't know if it's okay with the spouse. We don't know if it's okay with the spouse. And not that we have to follow one rule over the other, but in these situations, it's the pattern of communication about that really we get into the conflict about. It's about having the conversation about our problems. So this is one of those things where that safe communication script would be super, super helpful, because what we're going to do is when the first step in this communication is to say, hey, I just want to talk to you a little bit. Is there a time that works for you? Is there a time that works for you? And create the moment of the conversation to already be okay. I remember years ago, we had little kids and we had a lot going on, and when you've got little kids, and we had 4 little kids, so we were kind of really busy with lots of things. And there were some things that I would find myself wanting to talk about in the day, and I would kind of be frustrated. And then by the time I talked to my husband about it, it came out as frustration. And then I really didn't get a response. We kind of just got back way into the weeds. So one blessed day, this was a miracle on my part. I decided, I was going to do things a little differently. So I found a babysitter and I made dinner, and then I made a menu, and the menu was, I think if I remember right, it was like finances, sex, Friday nights. I don't remember what it was, but it was like, these were the topics of conversation that we needed to talk about. And just by me presenting the idea for the conversation in a lighter way, in like a non-threatening way, we were able to get through that conversation just so much better. I was able to explain how I felt, and he was able to explain what was going on in his mind. And like I say, most of the time when I understood what was happening, it was a totally different experience than the story I have been telling myself. So you'll hear that from me a lot. I'll say, the story I'm telling myself is, And it's hard to catch those things. It's really, really hard to catch those things. And I have compassion for that, because our dynamics, our paradigms are so ingrained in us because they kept us safe at some point. There was very safe to assume something, or to hurt, maybe you hurt ourselves so that they don't hurt us, that kind of dynamic. So the passion, it's like, this is where it's like, so, this conversation, how do you feel like our passionate relationship's going? Tell me a little bit more about that. And the other thing about that script is, it teaches you this little packet I've got for you. It teaches you there's two dynamics. So you've got the listener, and then you've got the speaker, or the receiver and the sender. And what has been was so great for me in my relationships when it was difficult and we didn't know how to get out of it, was this one simple tool. And if you go to the Wholeness Network, on the YouTube, I have a whole little like a little, we call them wholeness hacks about this. But it was life-changing, because what happens is when we're having a difficult conversation, someone's speaking and I'm talking, and I'm like, no, that's not it, blah, 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 and I'm keeping track of the points, I'm keeping track of where they're wrong, or that's not how I felt, or da 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 da, or well, I've been there, I've done that. So what we were taught, which was so helpful, was for one of us to get a notebook. So usually the receiver, or the listener, has a notebook. And what that was for me, and what I feel like that did for me, is my job was now just to listen. It wasn't to respond. It wasn't to understand even. It was just to make sure I understood the data and get it down on a piece of paper. So when I'm writing, my brain is now in a different state of trying to respond to what's being said. And it's now in the place of data. Like, my job is just to get the data down. And every so often, as I'm writing the notes, as best I can, I might say, so wait, did you mean this, or did you mean that? Like, and then they might give some clarification. They might say, yes, I was thinking this, or no, that's not what I was thinking. Oh, okay, let me make sure I got that right. And we can stop and say, so what I'm hearing you say is this what you're saying? And what their answer is yes or no, and they might explain more. But our whole goal in this safe communication is for our nervous systems to have support, because most of the time in an argument, you've got two nervous systems duking it out. That's the reality of what's happening. And our nervous systems are just a blessing to our lives, but they sometimes overly bless us with protection, or with the fight, flight, fight, right? Flight, which is the hypo, freeze, or the other one is fawn or appease. Sometimes, I don't know if you might notice that about yourself, but it's like under pressure, I get just really nice, and I just give up anything who I am, and I just pretend like I don't exist. I don't have any needs, just to make the problem go away. And that's the same exact motivation for someone who's angry. And that's the same exact motivation for somebody that shuts down. It's all about, I just need to stop and get out of this situation. And so we need to recognize what our usually we have one or two ways that we present ourselves in conflict. It's either the fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And if we just stop for a minute and recognize that those are trauma responses, what we're talking about. And so most likely we picked up those trauma responses in some kind of a trauma. And to recognize whether, it doesn't need to be a big T trauma for it to have changed who we are and change the way that we show up, especially in relationships. And a lot of times that's what my job is as a coach, a healer, and a mentor, is to work through those particular areas of our relationships, of our experiences in the past, those bruises, right? We're going to work on fixing the bruises. And then when somebody pushes on them, they don't hurt as much. And because the truth is if I push on your bruise, that does not hurt me. I don't have any issues with your bruise. That doesn't, I can look at it and say, oh, that's painful, but I can push on it all day long and it doesn't bother me. But it's our own, those bruises, the accident that happened a long time ago. That's the actual where the pain is. And we bump into each other. And, we are so amazing creatures at picking the exact person that's going to push on some of our bruises and ask us, maybe sometimes not in our favorite way, but at the end of the day, ask us to look at our wounds, our difficulties. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And we need a whole lot of compassion for ourselves and a whole lot of grit and some willingness to recognize that by looking at ourselves, we are not claiming defeat or anything of that kind of nature. So passionate, it'd be interesting to really, in that kind of area, those passion does change from different parts of our relationships, different parts of our lives, from one to another. It's different when you have young kids. It's different when you're newly together. It's different when you've been together a long, long time. And each of you is going to have opinions about what that expectation looks like. And the conversation about that is really, really important. And then, even back to we have different likes and dislikes. It's really important to get very clear and very self-introspective about the feelings that we're having about the fact that they don't enjoy the same things that we enjoy, that they're not showing up in the same way that we are. And to really kind of feel that, it's difficult to hold that feeling for a minute. Most of the time, something else comes in, like, oh, wow, suddenly I'm hungry, or I got to go lay down, or I wonder what's on the news, or, hey, I remember there's a sale on at whatever store. Our brains are so kind that they want us to not hurt. So they'll bring something else in and help us to not think about the difficulty. But if we can pause for a second and hold that, say, oh, that hurts. I wish this was different, or be really in reality with what's going on inside ourselves and recognizing that's happening inside ourselves, and giving ourselves like a little bit of that compassion that's important to me, that hurts me, or that's a high value to me, and being okay with being authentic about the fact that that's how we're feeling, and being okay with the fact that we're feeling that way. And that doesn't automatically put the other person in a responsibility to help us maintain that. And that's kind of a difficult lesson to learn, but it's a muscle. It's a muscle that you build. You really do build a muscle. One more, or another one. I've been with my boyfriend for over a year. Initially, he was charming and attentive, but now he gets mad at me and blames me for things I didn't do or have no control over. He makes jokes when they seem inappropriate and gets mad when I get upset. For one example, I am feeling emotionally drained and unsure what to do. So this is difficult because I'm going to use this example, and I'm not necessarily talking to this person, but I'm going to use this example to kind of bring up a dynamic that's very common nowadays. So we are hearing a lot about the word narcissist. We hear that a lot of time, narcissist. And sometimes I'm going to take a different approach to that idea. Number one, I think that there are narcissists. I think there are people that we can't have a relationship with in the way that we want. That's just impossible. I will say that narcissists are very highly wounded people, and you need to protect yourself in these situations, both at the same time. Again, we talk about if we get into that binary, good or bad, it gets really, it's more complex than that. So I'm going to speak to this because some things that came up in here are the fact that there was a change in relationship when something when someone presents themselves one way at the beginning and then it changes, and then especially when you just seem to find fault. It sounds to be like there's some gaslighting here as far as this is you did this, or they get mad or blames for things. There's obviously sounds like some hyper arousal happening, and this person's choosing to take out that hyper arousal on the spouse instead of having a conversation. And I will say they probably don't have access to the right way to have a conversation, maybe. And that's something that an individual has to decide if that's okay or not. That's something that's really, really difficult. And the hardest thing in the world is to get to that place where we recognize that it's not going to work out, or this is just how it's going to be, that they won't change, they can't change. Maybe that's a really painful place to be. But what I would say to her in this was, again, so this is going to be one of those times where I'm referring to what I refer to over is that sometimes it's not always about the difficulties in the past. Sometimes this is one of the rare occasions. Now, what the person with any narcissistic tendencies, they are responding from the past. Most likely, they have an attachment style that's either avoidant or probably most likely what we call a disorganized attachment. And I did a whole podcast, it's just been a few episodes ago, where I did a whole podcast about the attachment styles. And if you are having any kind of struggle in a relationship, a love relationship, an intimate relationship, a partner relationship, I would highly recommend listening to that episode about attachment issues, because we form these attachment styles when we're teeny babies, when we're very young. We learn very quickly whether we can depend on our caretakers in certain ways or not, and that passes with us. So so just quickly, you've got the securely attached with that. So in a childhood, that would look like mom and dad drop off the young child to daycare, let's say, and the young child kisses mom goodbye, and it's like, I'll miss you, maybe cries for a minute, but gets a toy and starts to play and is able to adjust to that situation. And they miss mom and dad, of course. They have a hard time. Every kid's a little different, but then they're going to show up when the parents show up to pick it up. They say, mom and dad, and they run and they give them a big hug. And that feels like it's just a normal scenario, but that's in a securely attached relationship style. Then we have what's called anxious. So an anxious attachment style might look like the child clings very, very tightly to mom and dad's leg. You have to pull the child off. The child's screaming, crying, and most of the time doesn't fully regulate while mom and dad are gone. They might they might numb out or things like that. Think of adult version, right? So in an adult version, you're going to text your partner all the time, or you're going to wonder where they're at, or you're going to check their position a lot. This is very anxious style of attachment, and it comes from this unease, like that feeling of anxiety that's been there for a long, long time. It makes sense that you would have some anxiety about relationships. That was the way it was presented long ago. The other one is the avoidant attachment. So this is an interesting one. So usually an avoidant style comes, a child will come to daycare. They could care less. Mom and dad, they're like, there's my toy. I'm off. I'm doing my thing. And usually when mom and dad come back, they are mad. They are mad. Like they're going to punish mom and dad because they left me here, even though they were kind of fine, but there's just some distance that they're going to let that parent know that there's some distance there. And then we have a disorganized attachment style, which is kind of a mixture of both. So they're going to have some anxiety about being alone. So in this situation, there was some anxiety about getting the relationship. So they show up with a mask of charming and attentive. Maybe that was true, and maybe that was not true. Maybe it was a little bit of both, but we're showing up with a mask on, needing to attract the person. We're anxious about attracting the person, and then once we have them, we move into the avoidance. So it's kind of both, and this can happen in one area, or this can happen, it can happen. What I mean is, like, it can happen just in a day. So you can just leave and come back and have that within a matter of hours, or it can be kind of a long-term thing where it's like, we were together and I was charming and I'm putting my mask on for a long time, and then we hit a point where I'm unsure, and then I'm going to go into avoidant because I'm going to, I'm going to feel safe that I'm going to reject you maybe before you reject me. So the disorganized attachment style is where we find most of these people called narcissists, and it's something that if they are willing to look at and to explore, there's hope. But most people tell you that is that's very slim. It's very, very wounded with very, very a whole bunch of pain, and they were probably very much never rescued. They were probably in the drama triangle, but it was either be a persecutor or be a victim. And so they'll use the victimhood when they use it, but most likely they're going to persecute in order to or perpetrate in order to get their needs met. It's a safety thing for them, and it's difficult. So I would say to you with this question is, again, to have that very, you're going to go into this conversation very grounded, do the work that you need to do to feel confident and relaxed and curious in your body. And as you begin to have this conversation, you're going to be very aware of the response. And if there is turning on you again, if you're like, hey, I say, I'm in my body, I'm feeling good, I know that I'm being sincere, and I'm just asking, hey, how does it, how can we grow our relationship? And then all of a sudden we get a turn. Well, how do you, how do you, how could you do that? Or, you all of a sudden now you're in this argument. And a couple of those two, it's up to you as far as whether 1 strike, 2 strikes, or 3 strikes, and you're out, kind of a thing. But it's going to be difficult, or it could be enlightening to see how that goes. But if you start to get pushback for things that don't seem to be in reality, then it's important to kind of recognize that this is the relationship that this person is presenting to you, and you have a decision to make. And maybe you need some support to make that decision. It's brings up all the, get curious about the feelings it's bringing up for you. Maybe a lot of times we have our own attachment style, are anxious. So it's like, we don't want to be alone, or we start to tell ourselves stories. I'll never find somebody else. Well, they did do this. Well, they did do this. And that's the truth, you are going to weigh it out, and you're going to see if that relationship is valuable to you. So getting into those values is really helpful. Understanding what is important to you is fair. It's very fair. So let's see. I wanted to grab one more, maybe a couple more scenarios, because a lot of times I wanted to hit all the different areas. So this one was about, it says, my 15-year-old is going through a phase. She's been pushing boundaries, staying out late, and her grades are slipping. I've tried taking her phone, grounding her, and nothing works, right? So this is really a typical experience that we have with especially teenagers. And it's a tricky situation because I feel like I can't have this conversation without saying that, the dynamics of this younger generation is very different, very, very different. Sometimes I I recognize within myself how often I, needed to just shut down and do what was expected of me without having introspective about who I was or what I liked or what my feelings were. And I was more, it was more about just obey, right? Um, and I don't know 100% if that was my favorite way of being, if that's the better way, right? If that's the better way. So so again, we think about what this person's going through, and we have to understand some of the scenarios. First of all, differences. So let me give an example. I have a daughter, my only daughter. I have one daughter, and she was my last. So I was so excited to finally get a little buddy, And I literally remember writing in a little notebook. I wish I knew where that notebook was when I don't know how old I was. I could obviously write, but it felt like I was young. And I remember writing like, I'm not going to do like my mom did. I'm going to be better and all this stuff. So I start uh, to interact with my daughter in the way I would have liked to been interacted with. So I would buy her the cutest outfits, and we would clean her room, and we would decorate it in pinks and yellows. And we would do her hair all cute. And that worked for some years until pretty soon it was like, I don't like that. I don't like that. And I started to understand a little bit about one of the tools that I work with a lot is the Enneagram. If you go to mechellewingle.com, I have a tab on the Enneagram. We also have, I did a podcast on each of the types. So enlightening to understand the Enneagram, because what I understood about this daughter, when I understood her energy, her experience, I recognized that she was different than me. Hallelujah, right? Of course. But it goes down to to me, it just feels crazy. But to her, some kind of chaos, a little bit of chaos in her life, in her room, is calming to her. It's calming to her. She needs things to kind of be in flow. I remember a colleague talking about how she loved not making her bed every day because it was a piece of art. Like every day, it created a different kind of piece of art. Now, to someone like me, who I'm a kind of a list maker, I'm kind of I like things to be more streamlined. Maybe that was just like nails on the chalkboard for me. But do you see how when I understand the dynamic of my child and I start to work with her in that dynamic, and recognize the difference that she has in her life versus me, our relationship started to make a big difference. It was kind of a struggle for a while. It was a struggle for a little while. You keep taking away things, you keep threatening, you keep doing these things, and at some point, we're creating a relationship that does not. It's not a long-term fix, and getting our children to do as we would like them to do. We just need to recognize where our values are. I would talk to them about values. You can Google a values list. I have one. You can reach out to me and I can send one to you. But it would be interesting to see what values show up for your child and what your values are, as far as, and we're talking about like, I wish I would have printed it out, like a list of all these different ideas. And usually you bring them down, you break it down to 2 or 3 of your core values, So sometimes for me, one of my core values is authenticity. Like it's one of the things I don't compromise on very well. And that's good because it's good in some ways. One way it's good is that, I would rather have somebody to show up to me authentic than to put that mask on. And I can sense that mask really quickly. That's one of the things I can do. I can sense when there's a mask on and I feel really uncomfortable. But to someone else, authenticity is not a value. We show up in our best selves. We show up being who we're supposed to be. That feels like just true for someone else, where the opposite's true for me. So getting to understand our values and what their values are. What do they value? And of course, you're going to think they're going to value playing and stuff like that. And that's just the conversation to have. And then we get into the drama triangle. And we start asking questions, or not the drama triangle, the empowerment triangle. And we start to coach. We start to say, well, what would you think if, what do you think that would look like if you just played all the time? What does that look like? Now, how you say it, how you present yourself, and it's all very much getting in tune with the sensations in our bodies, whether I am whether we call it's easy to say, like, we get a simple way is to say I'm below the line or I'm above the line. So if I'm below the line, you can just imagine what that feels like. It's I'm not confident, I'm angry, I'm not settled, I'm not these. This is Richard Schwartz he calls it the true self, or the big S self. And he says we have these qualities when we are in our true selves, and we all have these qualities. We all are born with these qualities. They're innate within us, and we can be in those states when we are in our true selves, and we can feel it and we can know it. And that's when our goal is to be into that state as much as possible. We're not always going to be, but when we're not in that state, most of the time there's a protector, some part of our psyche that's troubled, and to get back to self is the best thing we can do for ourselves. And it's and step one is to recognize I'm below the line, or I'm not myself, right? I'm not my true self. Something's coming up for me. And we may go years being below the line. And that's where we need some support. That's when we reach out for support. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think there's bootstrapping your way if out of it. I think we reach out for support. That's what coaches, mentors, therapists are all about, is helping us see and helping us pull ourselves up. If you've got a coach that's just standing over you, bullying you into feeling better, I would say that's not the best support. We need someone who is empathetic, who is going to ask the questions that help you discover more about yourself versus giving you answers. So with this 15-year-old going through a phase, taking her phone, grounding her, nothing works. I think there's that, I think it would be great to go to recognize that sometimes the injustices we demand from our children, this is going to be hard to hear. Sometimes the justice we demand from our children was the injustice that happened to us as a child. And that can happen. What's interesting is in the drama triangle. So we could even show up and we can say, I'm going to rescue, because, when we come in as the rescuer, we do for our kids, we maybe buy them things, we call their teachers and argue if they didn't get the right grade, and we show up as a rescuer. But then once we show up in the rescue, we are also inviting a victim. We're calling our child a victim. We're inviting them to be the victim, or we're inviting them to be a perpetrator. And that's kind of it's kind of what happens in these dynamics. We think that we're taking away their phone to discipline them, which I think is kind of funny, because it depends on what has happened. If the offense had something to do with their phone, then I could see that happening. But there's not a lesson, there's not a correlation. It's just, I want you to suffer so that you do what I say. That's kind of the idea of taking things away and grounding. I want you to feel bad so that you let go of who you are and you do it the way I want you to do that. That's really difficult to hear, but that's been the mode of discipline in most of society. That's been the agreed upon way of doing it. I hope there's a better and new way that we can move into having those kinds of relationships with young people, especially teenagers, when we move into that empowerment triangle, when we coach, when we say, what do you think? And because the thing is when they're young, when they make those mistakes, sometimes that's the best lessons they can learn. When they don't get everything they need, that's when they learn to be grateful. When they get that hard grade, that's when they start to learn within themselves, here's what I need to do. And number one, does that matter to me? If mom and dad pop in already, they don't have a chance to figure out if they liked having a good grade or not, if it was worth the effort. And we just have to get curious and clear that, that grade is something that we care about versus something that that is really truly very, very important in this moment. So anyway, I do have some more questions. Maybe we'll get to them another time. Unless there's anybody who has a question or a thought, I'm happy to, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we are, I'm just thrilled that you were here. Like I say, if you subscribe to the website, then we will have these on a more one-on-one basis. All right, we've got a question. Let's see. Okay, Paul, you're welcome to come on.
Hey, Mechelle.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I have a question. I just want
Yes.
to take you back, if okay,
Okay.
to your analogy about
Okay.
the bruises you had.
Okay.
Um, so my question really is, if you were the person that was pushing on those pain points, how can you recognize that's what you're doing to your
Mm.
partner? Um, and how would you stop yourself from doing that?
Okay. So, um, so the first thing we can do, so one of the things I would ask the person. So I just so that we can kind of get clear, because things up in our head get really confusing up there. So I thought of a few sentences that I would ask, like, for instance, I was just, that's something, if we finish that sentence, I was just trying to what, or I was just this, to ask yourself that question so that you're clear on what your intention was as you were pushing on the bruises, because that's a clue as to that's a big clue. So I was just trying to help. I wasn't trying to get you upset. And then we might go into a level deeper and say, what was your expectations about what the response would be? What did you assume the response would be? We kind of have to slow it down and really, really take some time with getting curious about the sequence. And we jump over those really quickly. That's just normal in relationship. But how do we slow that down? And then this is another thing is, so if you're the one pushing on someone's bruises, okay, and you can go back to that scenario, that time when you were pushing on the bruises, you see, I am really just I'm pushing their buttons, right? And we can ask ourselves, what did I need? What was I needing in that moment? And
Is that the
really get,
same as Sorry to interrupt you.
go ahead.
Is that the same as understanding why you're doing it?
Um,
Because I feel like sometimes it's if that's happening, yes, you're the other person is part of that dynamic, but I think that comes from within you if you're
mhm,
constantly doing that to someone, and that's not a nice thing for you to be doing. So you're almost
mhm,
punishing yourself at the same time. So
right.
the question would be then, how do I understand why I'm doing that? And
Mhm.
how can I, what things can I say or do for myself that would stop that behavior?
Yeah. Well, to get clear on, and it's tricky, but we take some time in coaching to get clear on what was the emotion happening almost just minutes or seconds before I started to push on their bruises. What was I feeling? What was I feeling inside? And a good feelings wheel that really starts to narrow down. We got to get deeper than sad, mad, and glad. It was, I was feeling humiliated, or I was feeling, these deeper words about how we feel about what's happening. And then because what happens when we're pushing on somebody's bruises, most likely that's we're talking about a fight response. you
So we're
know
retaliating for
yeah,
something
there's,
so we've been
yes,
triggered ourselves,
we're being
and the
triggered.
retaliation is the
So what is the trigger?
push on those pain
what is
points.
what is the trigger? Because that is a perpetrator type thing to do, or is that, I keep saying the wrong, is persecutor, persecutor thing to do is to start pushing. And the people that we are closest with, the people that we are in relationship with, in intimate relationships, we know where their bruises are. And when we're low, especially males, males aren't allowed to be low. You're not allowed to be vulnerable. So the best way to move from feeling victimized is to be that persecutor. Then I it's almost like my body fills up again and everything's okay in the world, on some level, on some level, usually. And we're repeating a dynamic, of course, that probably happened a long time ago. So what we do in a session is we slow that way down and we feel into that feeling. What was that feeling? What was happening in that moment? And we get curious. Sometimes it will take 2 or 3 sessions, but we get curious, and then we can say, when we feel it, and sometimes we can't put words to it, but we can feel it in our bodies. I felt that. Then we say, we could go into, when was the first time I felt that? And what's so amazing is I've never had a client who doesn't open, that a scene doesn't open up. And there was there was this moment in time when it's not about replaying that moment. It was that something was lost in that moment. Some attribute of ourselves was threatened or pushed out. When we experience shock, let's say, or when we experience humiliation. If I experience humiliation in a moment that's strong enough, my confidence is going to leave. I am not going to have the confidence I had after that situation that I did before. So this confidence has gone somewhere, and we work through imagery to kind of incorporate that back into our being. And like I say, sometimes it takes a few sessions to really get clear about that feeling, because that protector part really wants us to, it's trying to prevent us from feeling that, again, like I say, humiliation, or feeling less than, or feeling some kind of lesser feeling. And we want want that to go away. So we extreme to the other end. So we push someone else's buttons, and now we, in some part of us, returns to safety. But the why 100% is because we've been in a situation before where our buttons were pushed, and we didn't have the power to fight back, or we didn't have the power to say no, and it left a mark. And we're trying to get those pieces back, but sometimes we do it in ways that don't support us. And so, it's really good too, or a good process is when we go into that regret, because that's the difference between what I talked about before. A narcissist isn't going to have a regret. They're not going to have and say, I shouldn't have done that. They're not. They're going to keep justifying why they needed to do that. But for the rest of us who we feel guilty afterwards, the truth of the matter is this relationship communication thing is helpful, even if things have gone bad. Things are going to be difficult. Repair can be some of the most connecting things that we do. We are so connected, and because we've had these difficulties. So and the truth is, relationship, I think there's a quote, I'm going to say it wrong, it's by Harville Hendricks, but he says, we are hurt, we are all these things in relationship, and we are healed in relationship. Relationship is the most healing ground. If you go to a doctor and they might do the work, but if you have a good relationship with that doctor, the healing is exponentially better. It's in relationship that we really, and that's physical healing, right? Let alone mental healing or an emotional healing. It's in relationships. So when we bring that person into relationship with us and say, I hurt you in this way, I see that I've done that, and is there a way that I can is there a way that we can have a conversation about that? Or how, what would you suggest? How does that feel? That person, so if they go into, the hard part is if they might need a hyper version, they might need to be hyper for a minute, and they might need to get upset and get angry with you, and you can allow that. Or they might go into hypo, which they shut down and they get quiet. And that what they're both saying in both of those scenarios is, I don't feel safe. So it becomes your responsibility to create safety somehow in the relationship. Um, so that that comes. It depends on the different person, but but even to say out loud, my goal is to be a safe place for you, and I recognize I was not before, and I apologize that I was not safe before, and I want to do better. What can I do to help you feel safe? And usually in the beginnings of having these kind of conversations, we have these dynamics. So a lot of times you'll get back, well, you're just, and we won't quite be in the cycle of repair quite yet. So, but if you can say, okay, I hear what I'm hearing you say is da, 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 and you repeat back what has been said, then we get the nervous system online, and then we can actually have a conversation. But I think, consider the possibility sometimes the dynamic is that it's not so much about pushing the bruises as it is we are in some way, I'm going to use the word addicted to the remorse part of the scenario. That there's some part of us that is in remorse about something or guilt about something, and that feeling is overtaken. And consider the possibility that, again, when that shame or when that remorse or when that regret entered the room, entered the scenario, something else departed, and that and so now whenever that other feeling is required, we need that guilt and shame or that regret to step up and create a scenario to where we can get there. So that's a complex experience, and it just demands compassion on all sides. It's not fun to have our bruises hurt, and at the same time, we if we can't, if somebody's pushing our bruises on purpose, that's difficult, but we're going to bump up against someone else's bruises a lot and not know it. So it becomes some self-reflection about whether I was intending to do that, whether that was the other person's sensitivity, and to get clear about that. And it takes it takes some questions, and depending on where we go from A to B, it might the scenario goes in different directions. But sometimes that feeling, the desire for repair, maybe we didn't get repair when we were young, so we create scenarios where we make up. That's very common. I felt that even in myself for a while. It was like I'd kind of start an argument because there was this piece of me that needed to know, that felt like the repair was so valuable, and had to work through that. So that's a question to have about, what did you need? What do you need in the regret? What do you need in that moments before? What was happening? There was some nervous system activation going on, and that's what we got to get curious about. And if we really want to look at it, then it's a slow process. It's a little bit of a slow process. So,
okay.
Yep.
Thank
All
you.
right. Anybody else have any questions? I have just been grateful to be with you today. And did anybody have any questions? I didn't see. Oh, do you have one, Carrie? You can unmute. Thank you for coming on. Oh, I don't hear you quite
Oh,
yet. Oh, there we go.
sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was
Yes.
muted. I'm not real familiar with these
I
Zoom
know,
meetings.
right? It's always
This is a tough one because I had a situation this week and it happens a lot. And
Mhm.
it's unintentional on my part, but I will rub up against my twin sister's bruises and I will trigger her severely
Mhm.
when I'm doing something that I think is helpful or nice or considerate,
Mhm.
but her reaction will be so from her own pain, um, so dysfunctional, and the control that she's trying to put forth over me is so severe that then I'm in a mode of wait, wait, I'm my own individual. You
Mhm.
can't force me to behave a certain way. What happened was is I invited her to go on a trip and I invited to pay her way on the airfare, and a childhood friend invited to let her stay at her place. So it wouldn't really be a huge expense. But the thing that she was upset about is we didn't include her in a group text where I just asked this friend how she was doing, and then the friend invited us to come to Boston to see her. So it's just been such a strange scenario because I know she was highly triggered, all
Mhm.
because I didn't include her in a group text, but it was an unintentional. It wasn't an intentional leaving someone out or planning without her, but in her mind it was, oh, we planned this without her, and it wasn't at all. I mean, so the friend and myself have spent the last couple of days going back and forth trying to convince her that, hey, no, we didn't intentionally leave you out. We're wanting to include you. This just popped out of the blue. And my sister's feeling is that I should never even text the friend unless I'm in a group with her. And I'm
Mm.
like, hey, wait a minute. I've worked my entire life to be an individual from you.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to tell me that I can't text a friend and ask how they're doing. But
Mhm.
the reaction is so strong from her. This drama cycle that you've explained. I mean, I
Mhm.
just see how it's all playing out.
Mhm.
And my response is, hey, I did something nice to offer to take you here. Um, you want to control that I should never text this friend without you on there. That's not going to happen. Sorry it wounded you. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. I mean, we've kind
Mhm.
of got it resolved now, I think, but it always happens. I mean, it happens over and over and over again. So
Yeah.
when and her response is, that's just a lifelong wound that she has of feeling left out, and her feeling is there's nothing she can do about it. That's always the way
Mm.
it'll be for her. And I
Mhm.
can't change that because I suggest, hey, I feel like, there's a way for you to heal your trauma. There's a way for you to go forward and find some help with therapy or whatnot on that.
Yeah.
But that's not true for her.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't really even
Yep.
know what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
I'm just expressing that sometimes we wound someone
mhm.
unintentionally, and there's kind of nothing we can do about it
Yeah,
because we have
it's
to.
true.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. We're gonna have bruises. We don't get out of childhood without a whole lot of bruises. It's for sure. And it's not always our responsibility to not make sure we're not pushing on everybody's bruises. That's one end of that's too far off into the spectrum of relationship, to be responsible for everybody else's hurt. The other thing on the other end of this perspective, the spectrum is that sometimes we are so used to this dynamic that happens over and over again. We just go, it's just like a play. Everybody gets out their scripts and we almost say the
Oh,
exact
it
same
is.
things and
Yeah.
feel the exact same way. We do it over and over again. And so, because I'm talking to you, I would say, one of those, something to get out of, again, to move out of that drama triangle, it's about getting curious. And, so it would be interesting if you could say at some point when your sister gets upset, number one is because we want to we're getting accused of something, most likely, because she obviously felt like, maybe she felt like she was a victim and that you needed to rescue her by taking her on this trip or whatever. And then she has no choice to be a perpetrator. So she just, or a prosecutor. Or persecutor. So she just jumps into that role, right? But if you were to get out, say, to get out of that triangle, say, so when she's like, well, I was this and she's talking a million miles an hour. Then that's when we move into the, okay, so you felt this and this and this, or the best thing especially when I'm kind of just zingy for a minute and I don't, like, here I am, like, here we are in this scenario and you feel a little uncomfortable, I will say, can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me more about that? And my learning, my asking for more isn't because I'm going to admit I'm wrong, and it's not for me to say, I'm a terrible person. What my goal in that is to really just move out of the drama triangle, get out of the drama triangle. And that gives me an opportunity, if I feel uncomfortable because if I feel like I'm going to give them power by doing that, there I recognize where I can, there I can look at my own stuff, and that doesn't justify their feelings, but it's like, because really words aren't power necessarily. Like, we just, by getting curious and asking a question, we aren't saying you're right and I'm wrong, but sometimes we feel that way. Sometimes it registers in our nervous system that way, that if we don't defend ourselves or if we don't protect ourselves, then somebody's going to hurt us. And if that's true, if that feels true a lot, then there's some wounding that has happened. There's definitely some wounding that has happened and caused this dynamic. But yeah, so it would be interesting. So, you could say, you could even go back, even now that you say it's resolved, it'd be interesting if you could go to her and say, just tell me again, tell me how that felt, tell me again how that felt. And let her, and then repeat. It's the same thing, repeat back. So what I'm hearing you say is, you felt upset, and because a lot of times too, when you say, tell me how you felt about that, or tell me more about that, they haven't thought in their heads. A lot of times the arguments that they're making really are not, they don't actually make sense outside. We just go into the roles, and nothing's really been actually communicated. Like, it makes no sense. It's nonsensical that you should always have a group text with this person. Like, that's odd. That's an odd thing. So she's
her requirement. It's her requirement. I'm not going to do it. So
yeah, she's spewing ideas to try and get her footing, more than, because I think she would agree at some point, if she's in her big S self, and she would not agree that makes any sense at all, that's a sensical thing. So there's a protector going on there, and so, it'd just be interesting to change the dynamic, because it's like, okay, tell me more about that. What was that like for you? How did you feel? What went through your mind, or what did you think how did that present to you? What was that like for you? And just you're not going to have to answer to it. So at the end of she says, well, you said this and you said this, and you always do this and you always do this, and you're not going to take that responsibility. You're not going to say, well, I'll change. You're not going to commit to change. You're going to take it. You're going to take the information and say, okay, thank you for sharing. I appreciate you sharing with me. And that's it, because that's to create the change in the relationship. But it's not about, and you have not promised to change anything. You have not said you're right and I'm wrong. You're just
basically, I'm letting her be heard. Yeah, I'm letting her be heard. Hearing her pain a little bit, and then moving on.
And we talk about how we imagine that pain that's coming out shoots and it kind of lands to the side of us. We're not going to take it in. If we can be in our good place. That's why it's so good to circle back, because if I can be grounded in myself, recognize everything she's going to say isn't a reflection on me as a human being. Everything she's going to accuse me of isn't necessarily, is not something that is true. This is a dynamic happening here. This is a drama happening here. This is not reality. And the fact of the matter is in the reality, when we come at relationship like this, we actually feel more empowered rather than less empowered, even though we're taking it what feels like a hit, right? We're taking what feels like a hit. So, but twins,
because that's really generous to it's generous to give her that opportunity to tell me, because I already know what she's going to say and I really don't even care to hear it. I feel kind of callous to say that. But I mean, I know logically that what you're saying would be the loving thing to do. I don't even want to. I mean, I think if it were a different scenario, I think that would be for sure the logical thing to do. I just kind of want to move on, just because it's so bizarre. But I did want to throw it out there because it's completely trigger. She admits, lifelong trigger. In her mind, there's nothing she can do to change it. Therefore, I can't help her. I can show her love, which I already did. I already said, I'm so sorry that I triggered you. It was not my intent. I had no intention of leaving you out, blah, 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 blah. My friend did the same thing. We both did, And
anyway. Well, you definitely need to take some time to allow yourself that was difficult for allow yourself some grieving and some compassion for yourself that was a difficult situation, because even, nobody has to take responsibility for us to have our feelings hurt, and so we kind of skip that sometimes. We think, well, there's got to be, we think, well, she's doing the best you can. True. And at the same time, that was hard on me. That was hurtful. This is, there's some grief that needs to happen for this relationship that's a little different than we would like it to be.
I think it's like you were mentioning about the twin thing. It's the older twin sister, the bigger twin sister, the one that I feel like always has bossed me around, that I've worked so many years to try not to allow that to happen. So it's hard for me to sit back and allow her to continue to boss me around, because I'm kind of coming into my own and standing up for me, so it's a tough scenario for sure.
That is, it's tough. Relationships are tough. Relationships are tough.
I mean, so tough.
The clear thing is just to use this as an example to recognize, what it felt like when she started to get triggered inside yourself, and just become aware of what you were feeling, and get familiar with that feeling that I started to feel whatever, and what was, what would I have rather felt, or what did I wish I would have done? A lot of times too, that we can talk about trauma. Sometimes in the past, trauma is also what got frozen in time. So I needed to do this. I needed to be upset. I needed to yell and scream and cry. At this moment, I did not. And so now future experiences, that's stuck in me, and I want it to, it replays itself, those little traumatic moments, little T traumas. It can be between two twin sisters when they're 5 years old. We have this dynamic. We create these beliefs we create in those moments that are very, very powerful in our lives. And like you say, you've recognized one of them, that you gave your power away for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's right. And people don't like it when you make the changes where you take them back your power. And that hasn't been the dynamic. That's really difficult. Hard for people.
It's difficult. And so it's when we change things up, that can feel threatening. It can feel threatening to people. And so we have to do both at the same time: be authentic and authentically empowered, and compassionate, and kind of expect some pushback. So anyway, Tina, I'm happy to have you come on if you would like. Do you want to come on? Thank you so much, Carrie.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't want to take, I know it's
You're
almost
great.
over, right?
Yep, we got it. You
got it. Okay. My husband went through, um, since May, he had some heart issues, and he's always been kind of a heavy energy. And because he got sick, we weren't able to go onto a cruise that our daughter had given us,
Okay.
for a gift.
Oh.
And he was in the ICU, and he's always been a real heavy energy, like I said. And I've kind of given in to him over and over and over again in so many different experiences. And we've been married a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to come back to my own. But I think what happened after not being able to go on the trip, it was just like, I think he ended up, my shelf broke. I mean, it just fell. I know my daughter has told me how her shelf felt. Her shelf broke, and I was like, I can't figure that out, but oh, now I know.
Mm.
And so, as I've tried, I've tried to understand him for years. He is extremely intelligent and um, is very capable at what he does, but emotionally, kind of feels like he's um, an adolescent. And
Yep.
I've tried so hard to make him happy, but at the same time, in order to do that, you just have to, shut yourself off more and more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just really trying to come to grips. I feel like I'm doing better,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like I'm explaining things better to him where he can understand. But, he's still waiting for me to come back, the mothership to come back and take over all of his stuff and
Mm-hmm.
handle it. And the mothership is not going to come back.
Right.
I'll just be honest.
Yep.
And so it was interesting. I came back from a meeting and I asked how he was doing, and he had done yard work, and he said, I'm just trying to figure out what there is to eat. And I was just like, oh, so interesting. He says, well, what's in the fridge. And I'm like, well, you can have this, you can have this, you can have this. And I said, so are you trying to get me to make lunch for you? And he said, what did I say? I said, I will, I just wanted to know what was available. And I was just like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the kind of thing he does all over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I have dyslexia, and he he's always made these little quips, that Tina can't do this, that Tina can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, I want to remain in the relationship, but it's changing and it's really challenging. And my daughter is being so helpful because she's, she understands what he's like.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to I, I'm rocking the boat, and I'm rocking the boat in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And the church is kind of intertwined in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just so, and I'm taking your other class, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something you can push me towards, or some place that I can go to that I can get maybe a little bit more help on how to deal with? And I do think he's kind of narcissistic in a way. So,
well, a few things that spoke out to, this emotionally adolescent is typical. We usually allow men, or not us, but society allows men two emotions, sexual emotions and anger, and then women everything but those things. We can't be sexual and we can't be angry. And that is just the most ridiculous dynamic that we have created for ourselves. It's causing so many problems. And so many women are waking up to the idea that they're not going to play by that rule book anymore. We're kind of done with that rule book. So I understand what you're saying. And, so it's like, it's hard because, if things were going my way, I wouldn't want them to change, right? If I could ask you what's in the fridge and you tell me and you make me a sandwich, that works for me, right? That is really nice. And I don't want that to change. But at the same time, that's not a dynamic that is helpful, and that's not a that's a one up and one down relationship. And what we're hoping for is an equal partnership. We want to move into partnership. And so a conversation about what would that look like, what would it comes down to, number one, your values, and how much of this relationship are we hoping for, how much are we wanting this to change, or are we just do we want to just go into accept the way that it is and find some delight somewhere else? Like, there's a lot of choices here. We don't have to come between. We're apart or we're best friends. There's a lot of spectrum here that has a lot to do with our loves, our values, and ideals about what we want in our relationship. But that heavy energy is, that's difficult. And just one of the things that we one area to look at is when we have a heavy energy type person. Most likely that gives a clue that we are a light energy type person, that we have become, whether that's authentic to us or whether we're putting a mask on. We have to recognize that for whatever reasons that have happened in the past or whatever scenarios that have come up, the safest thing for me to be is to be low energy or light energy, not rustle any feathers, not rock any boats, and those kind of things. And it's not authentic, even if it's quote nice. And we women are really, that's a really easy thing for us to fall into, is to be the nice one. And we are, like, the best thing about women is we can do so many things at the same time. We can both feel our feelings and we can feel someone else's feelings a lot. And we can clue into the fact that, asking about what's in the fridge, there's more to that sentence than just asking what's in the fridge. And one of the first things we can do is, within ourselves, is to just simply begin to do things as simple as only answering the questions that are asked of us. And we end the innuendoing, because we do that so much. We answer the innuendo more than we answer the actual question. And what's easy to do too, is we might answer the innuendo frustrated or angry, or just like, we might say something back, which is, it's understandable, right? It's totally understandable. But let me ask you this about, so in May there were heart issues. If I were to ask you, what do you think, where is there grief in your husband's life? Where is the grief?
He I tried to map it. He was born at a time when his mother's sister was living with them. And my husband's name is Byron, and his sister was divorced and was dating a man in Nebraska whose name was Byron. So they named my husband Byron in hopes that would encourage, make that a union. Well, my mother-in-law's sister said, "No, I'm going to go back to Utah and marry someone who is a member of the church." And my mother-in-law didn't marry someone who was a member of the church, so that was anyway. So, one of the things that was very telling to me is that my mother-in-law to put the kids down for a nap. She had three children, like two sets of Irish twins, basically. So the three
Ooh,
were like bing, bing, bing.
yeah.
And they would read stories together, and Byron would be in the crib, and he'd want to come and lay on the bed with him too. And they'd say,
Mm,
"Oh, Byron, we don't want you. Just go
mhm,
to sleep in your bed."
mhm,
And so I think that just triggered him. You
mm,
know, another time when he was an adolescent, he used to eat with his mouth open and be noisy. So um, they got a record by who was it? Anyway, some comedian of the noisy eater,
mm.
and played
They
that for
shamed
him
him.
at the dinner table. Yes,
Mhm,
and he was just shamed, and he was bullied at school,
mhm,
because he was they called him Berkey Turkey, and he was bullied. And for me, when people bullied me when I was in school, I just give it right back to him. But anyway,
mhm,
so I guess I became a bully too. But I was, but he was, and he said, well, I just knew I could get back at him because I was smarter than them.
mm,
And so that was the way he dealt with a lot of that grief, was being smarter. And now his brother and his wife have moved into our town, into our ward,
mhm,
and he's I think he's happy with that. But I think the reason he had heart issues too was that I don't think he really wanted to go on the trip.
mm,
He said it was his bucket list, but I'd never heard it was a bucket list until it became my bucket list.
mm,
But we went to Italy with his brother and sister-in-law, and he was pickpocketed
mm,
in Italy. And so I think whenever he does something like that, he doesn't want to
mm.
really go because he's always afraid. Because not that, well, it was traumatic, but also it
Right,
made him look fool.
right, right. It made him look.
So
It was disempowering. Disempowering.
yes.
So it sounds like, what's interesting is it sounds like he shares with you a lot of his intimate moments. You know a lot about those inner thoughts he has, and
Well,
those inner feelings
the,
he has.
the thing I got about his as a baby was from his mother.
Oh, okay.
How she kind of was almost thought that was funny.
Mm,
Oh, Byron, just stay in your crib. We don't want you. I was
yeah,
like,
right.
yeah.
Right. And
So,
and again, I'm not trying to get you, a lot of times, I'm not trying to get you to be compassionate and see the other point of view. I'm not trying to do that. And I wasn't even trying, I'm not trying to do that with anybody. I don't want that. That is a part of it, of course, to have compassion for the other person.
oh
But
yeah, I've tried and tried to
yeah, but
understand him.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, understanding doesn't resolve conflicts all the time. That's not, and we can understand it and it's still painful. Like with someone's a narcissist, we can understand their pain. But we don't necessarily know what to do about it. So um so it sounds like that we've been married a long time, and your desire to show up in the relationship is changing a little bit. You're wanting to kind of change. You're wanting to kind of do things a little differently, and a lot of times, if we show up in that low energy, then that makes their heavy energy get bigger. Get bigger. So
Mhm,
there's some
mhm.
practice and there's some work to do into feeling empowered enough to where that reaction that he gives doesn't tumble us over. And I'm telling you, it sounds impossible. I know. I've been there. I've been there in my own relationships where it feels like that I just need him to do something differently for me to feel better. And the fact of the matter is that's true. That's not false. That's true. But it's not there's two sides to this. I learned for myself that it's both me being aware of what's going on inside myself and the discomfort and the frustration and the angry, and if he's willing to join me, then then we can create something new. But I think that it's a disservice for you to keep playing a role that you're not comfortable playing in. And it doesn't sound to me like you're pushing his buttons or whatever. You're just trying to assert your own self a little bit, trying to be your own person. And so it'd be interesting to have to have a conversation. This is one of those things where we're going to learn more from this conversation than necessarily just the yes or no answers. But the inquiry is going to be very much about whether whether we can come together and have a conversation. So, create a time. I'll send you this safe communication. Say, is there a time that we could have a conversation? And tell me a little bit. And we're going to get curious at first. We're going to ask. Maybe we'll even start and say, hey, I would like you to be the speaker. Tell me about things what do you think about our relationship? And again, you're just taking notes, and you will see when you take notes, it's the strangest thing. But at the beginning, you're going to hear, well, you this, you this, you this. And then you repeat back. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is this and this and this. And is there anything more? And you're going to be so grounded in yourself. You're going to be so in your positive state, and we're going to, do the things to get us in a good place, so that we're not trying to even respond to what he's saying. What we're trying to do is to get to the end where he says, at the point where he says, where you say, is there anything more? And he says, no. And then we're going to take a break. And then you're going to look at what he said in that moment. You're going to look at all that he said, everything that he had to get out. And then you're going to recognize, you're going to see whether, and then you're going to say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this paperwork. I'm going to look at it for a few days. I'm going to really, really pay attention to this. And then I'd like us to come back, and I would like to have a turn, and then he gets to be the writer, and you get to tell your point of view. Some of it you're going to, and you might do this several times back and forth. And it at the very beginning, you think, what am I getting into? Like, what am I getting into? But after 3 or 4 times, it's like, once I see my own stuff on paper, because when I'm the speaker, a lot of times I'm agitated, I'm below the line. When I see that later, it's kind of like, well, if that was yesterday, like, I don't feel that way now. It's really kind of wild. But it gets out, and pretty soon that notebook, it becomes a little unnecessary, because we start to recognize our own feelings. We start to see the patterns in our own self. And like I say, I started at the very beginning. I don't know if you heard, but we go into 2 phases. We go into hypoarousal or hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is what it sounds like he is. When you say heavy energy, he's probably more loud. He's probably more outspoken. He's that kind of thing. And then you might go into hypoarousal, which is more shut down, which is more trying to do, we try and do the right thing, which is an appease or a fawn response. We're trying to go into that place where we're not doing it wrong, and that's still the same trigger. That's still the same trauma response as even the anger. Relationships with they're turning a little bit over right now, because us women are starting to a little bit change, where a lot of us are changing the rules a little bit, and if we share ourselves, our ideas, our feelings in a empowered way, then they have a decision to make about if that's okay or not. And we don't assume 3 or 4 ideas down the line. We just stay with what's in front of us. We don't assume if we say this, that automatically means this, or that kind of thing. But it's a process. And we're going to work through that. We're working through some things in the other in our class, that kind of thing. About our big goal is to work on you as an individual, to get you into a place where you recognize your dynamics, you recognize your own bruises, right? And you allow those bruises to exist and live and be real. That's one of the first things that we have to do, is recognize our own dynamic. And then we empower ourselves. Once we kind of heal some of those wounds, then we're able to show up more fully with all of the parts of us supporting us. So I wish there was more I could tell you right now, but we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that. But I just feel for you. I just send my love to you. It's difficult when those things change, and I tell you what, I've been on the end of that, where my spouse was changing things, and it feels very unsafe. And at the same time, his change, if he hadn't have changed, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I wouldn't be here. So your spouse has an opportunity to grow, and you are doing a service to him. You're not just hurting his bruises. You're calling forth some places for him to grow, and do that for yourself. Again, do that for yourself. Your growth. We either grow together or we grow apart, but sometimes that first person needs to grow a little bit, and growth is in toward the empowerment. And that's what my goal is for you, to become enough centered in yourself that some of those little things don't rock you anymore. Because that's the thing, is we're so unstable. We get rocked by the smallest, tiniest things. And they don't feel tiny. Don't get me wrong. They don't feel tiny. They don't get upset.
Yeah.
But it's like we're on this never ending cycle of like being beaten down and feeling hurt and feeling upset. So anyway, but yeah, we'll continue this conversation. Thank you so much for asking your question. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.